All right, we are live this evening, and per the little tab that I put out on YouTube. This is not my forte as far as Nephilim, aliens uh, that exist, but I have L.A. Marzulli on with me, who that has been, and I'll let him describe more. But that has been something he's been researching for years. And we also have Tim Cohen. He was a recent guest on a different topic, but tonight we're going to be discussing some of his research on Nephilim, on chimeras, and evidence maybe of life forms on planets, on the moon, and comets. But LA, just briefly introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit about your ministry and your research.
I'm L.A. Marzulli. I'm the author of 13 books and 27 films. 28 is coming out very shortly. We're working feverishly to get all the UFO films out before the end of the year. Those are marching orders from the Lord, who redirected our steps. Right now, we were supposed to be in Europe filming, but that was a redirect. He really wants to get the last 3 of the UFO films done. 6 is just about to be released. It's on cattle mutilations. It's the darkest film I've ever been involved in, and we really connected the abduction phenomena with the cattle mutilations. So we did a deep dive there, and we went and discussed and interviewed people, one rancher in particular, Roy Miller, that had 16 cows in like 18 years. I mean, the numbers might be wrong, or 14 cows in 16 years, but it's ridiculous. And we, of course, interviewed Chuck Zukowski, which is Mr. Cattle Mutilation himself. He's been to about 50 mutilations. And what we uncovered with this is you're looking at Hell's Kitchen. This is a deep dive into Hell's Kitchen, and it directly correlates to the abduction phenomena, which was number 4. So number 4 in the film series is abductions, 5 is crop circles, 6 is the cattle mutilation film, 7 and 8 are on Roswell. And we were actually into the debris field, and we discovered something there, which we've already had analyzed, which will be in the film. And I think you'll find that interesting. And number 9 in the series will be, what is the truth? What are we looking at? There's 2 sides of this, essentially. One side is that these are extraterrestrials from some other planet and far, far away, and that perhaps they seeded us here, seeded all life here. They are our progenitors. They genetically manipulated us. That's one side. The ancient alien side, the Anunnaki side of the equation. And then there's the biblical prophetic narrative, which of course is what I hold dearly, that these entities are the fallen watchers. They're back. Jesus tells us it'll be like the days of Noah. And what differentiates those days, of course, is the presence of the B'nai Ha-Elohim, the fallen ones, the watchers. And I believe that the Anunnaki are nothing more than the watchers. I mean, that's what it is, in my opinion. We're wiped out in the flood, but the vestiges of the Nephilim are global. It's everywhere you look, if you know what to look for. And that's our whole 8-part series on the Trail of a Nephilim. We go to all sorts of places all over the globe, and we sort of prove that. So that's a little bit about what we do. And I just want to give a shout out to my business partner, Gil Zimmerman. He's been with me now for 5 different films. He just got done filming On the Trail of a Nephilim, probably number 9, which is going to be a mind blower when it comes out. So there you go.
And I have I've watched several of your videos, numerous YouTube chats and things like that. And so if anybody is, even if you're not interested in this, especially with everything going right now, I would highly recommend LA's work, and because it's fascinating, and especially in the times we live in. All right, so Tim, I'm going to put you on your solo layout now, and if you could just on this topic, just do a brief introduction as to your research on this, and then we'll go from there.
So I researched the entire gamut related to this, including what's out there in our solar system. I've got a forthcoming series of books called Solar Apocalypse that has individual volumes on certain planetary bodies in our solar system, like Mars, the moon, comets and asteroids, and then other planetary bodies, and of course also Earth. as the first volume, and I deal with secret space programs and so-called whistleblowers from those programs in all of that as well. And I've discovered some fairly shocking things I didn't expect to find myself originally in our solar system. And LA, to your point, I am a young Earth creationist, and I put everything in a biblical context in terms of the so-called aliens. And so when we talk about the biblical Nephilim, prior to Noah's flood, we had fallen angels, a group of them come into human women and produce unnatural offspring, human-angel hybrids. Those were the original Nephilim. And a lot of Christians believe that those, who accept that from Genesis 6, believe that those Nephilim were wiped out entirely in Noah's flood. It's my contention that, in fact, they were not completely wiped out. There were some that were off Earth. What they had been doing on Earth is not just limited here. They had been hybridizing all life on the planet to produce all kinds of chimeric hybrids.
I agree.
All over the surface of the Earth, including the dangerous dinosaurs, but they didn't limit it to our planet. They began to seed those things all over our solar system, which was more habitable prior to Noah's flood. So the catastrophe that struck Mars, the catastrophe that struck the moon, all that transpired immediately before Noah's flood on Earth. Earth was simply the least damaged of the planetary bodies. So what happened, I believe, is that we had several highly, very densely populated planetary bodies in our solar system. And with Noah's flood on Earth, what precipitated that, including cometary or meteor bombardments, comets and asteroids, that also damaged Mars, it damaged our moon, wiped out what the Nephilim had been doing there by and large, but left a lot of trace fossils and evidence and possibly some ongoing life still on Mars. And I've got evidence of that as well. So what has been happening with the so-called alien phenomena, you say, LA, that you think they're perhaps the original Anunnaki or Nephilim. I would say that they are something a bit different from that. So when the Nephilim that were on Earth, the ones that were still on Earth when the flood occurred and died, they became the demons, human-angel hybrids. That's what demons are, disembodied Nephilim.
I agree.
But demons can possess bodies, whether they be human or an animal or a fake alien. So in terms of the fake aliens, the induction phenomena is about producing a whole series of quote-unquote races of humanoids with an agenda to produce one or more races capable of self-reproduction. And I don't believe that the fallen angels and the Nephilim, secondary Nephilim is what I call them, so basically the chimeric hybrids that are possessed by demons in some of these anti-gravity craft, I don't believe they've achieved self-reproduction yet. So I think the whole abduction phenomena, what they're doing with the cattle mutilations, the things that people report in terms of being aboard the anti-gravity craft and what's being done to them, taking reproductive materials and so forth, it's all related to an agenda that is ultimately geared toward producing humanoids capable of self-reproduction and then annihilating mankind on Earth to completely replace us, so that these humanoids would look to the fallen angels and so forth as their quote-unquote gods. And there was a similar agenda being pursued prior to Noah's flood, including the possibility that human slaves, or voluntary worshipers, as the case may be, were seeded by Nephilim to other planetary bodies in our solar system, possibly beyond. So in my Solar Apocalypse series that's coming, which is a multi-volume series, I've been working on it now for several years, I produce evidence of very obvious artificial structures on Mars, some that appear to be artificial on the moon, Titan-sized creatures all the way down to creatures the size of mice on Earth. And when I say Titan-sized, I'm saying not just as big as something like Godzilla, but in some cases vastly larger. So, and evidence of Titans on Earth that dwarf the dinosaurs that are known. So I actually have one that I'm going to share in the series that could be dug up on Earth today that is about 550 feet in length, a sea creature, partially exposed on their surface. So, but where I'm going with that is Asian mythology, where they're, in folklore, where they're talking about giant creatures constantly. Such creatures actually existed, maybe not exactly like the ones that are folklore, but that size and larger did exist. So, and I'll show some here today when we get into this. I'm not just going to say it, I'll give examples. I have evidence of ongoing life on Mars, reptilian and insectoid, most likely. All kinds of fossils, some fully exposed, some just heads, many just heads.
Real quick, Tim,
Yes,
and
Scott.
this evidence just for, and I've listened to, and Tim does have a an interview with a gentleman that's about 5 hours long. If anybody is fascinated, interested in this topic, we can't go that long tonight, but he's got about a 5 hour interview that's posted on his YouTube channel, and I'll go ahead and plug it real quick. It's author Tim Cohen. You have to put in author Tim Cohen YouTube. And then you'll find it. And in the video list, he literally does a 5 hour discussion on this. So, but Tim, and I'm going to do a little leading here just because we don't have that much time, but it's my understanding, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that this evidence that you say you have, it's not something that you went to Mars or the moon. You have pulled this from NASA photos, from other space agency that's public domain. Is that correct?
Yeah, all the photos are public domain, and I'm going to give people the ability to independently verify them in the book, including with software that I had specially prepared for that purpose. So they can download the photos in many cases directly from the space agencies themselves, not just NASA. Go directly to the images I'm showing to see that they're original images, and go from there to verify that the finds are real. I have photos, LA, by the way, of all of the Apollo astronauts, including in many cases video footage, examining fossils on the moon, things NASA never talked about. Good photos. So very shocking and extensive things. So just to dive into it, I'll give a little overview here and just show a few examples today. I have literally tens of thousands of examples, and I could have.
Like I said, we'll have time to maybe go through 4, 5, 6 of your what you believe are the best. And real quick, LA, as far as your research and evidence, and I believe before we went live, you've really focused here just on Earth as far as evidence of Nephilim, fossils, things of that nature. Is this in some of the books that you've written and published? Some of the, I guess, fossilized artifacts, things of that nature?
Well, I've never looked at anything fossilized. It's like I've been to places, let's say Gilgar Raphaim and Menga in Spain, all across the Mediterranean, island hopping, where there was a diaspora from the Levant at the conquest of the Levant, the Promised Land 3,500 years ago, Joshua and Caleb. You get into places like Portugal and France with the 80,000 standing stones that were there. And there seems to be a progression from the pristine stonework that we see in Egypt, and also places like Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo. And then it changes. It morphs into the dolmens and the megaliths, and then it changes again into the earthworks, and then it all just disappears. Then after that, it just, and no one knows what happened to these people. In fact, I can make a strong case that we hear the same, no matter where I go, whether it's Corral, Peru, or Teotihuacan, Mexico, or Chaco Canyon, or the mound builders in Ohio, or Menga, Spain, or wherever. Well, we don't know what these people call themselves, but they just seem to have vanished. They just blended into the indigenous population. And we hear this over and over and over again. I've delved in a little bit to what Tim's talking about on Mars. I believe something incredibly cataclysmic happened there. I believe it might have been the seat of the dragon's power. That might have been where he actually, ruled from, even though he's on Earth and all of that. I do agree with, and Enoch tells us this, that they commingled the seed. They were creating chimeras all over the place, which is why the flood. I am not a young earther, I'm an old earther, but that's, we can just leave that on the table and go from there, and talk about the points we agree on. And I agree, Mars, something really cataclysmic happened. There was a secular guy, I forget his name, he wrote a book. I just finished it maybe a year
ago. John Brandenburg.
Probably, yeah. Who talks about the cataclysm on Mars and the nuclear event that happened there. And
I am a scientist, by the way, L.A. Marzulli. Yeah.
Okay.
I am.
So then you're right in there. I believe something really cataclysmic, and I think this is why everybody's racing to Mars to try to find what's there, to claim it, to look at the technology and get it. I have no problem with any of that. I think that something happened that was that's part of the heavenly war. I mean, we don't know the dating. We may disagree on this. I put it further back, but I mean, nobody really knows. I mean, we can, you can do point counterpoint till the cows come home. we agree that something is there, something happened, something cataclysmic. So I would stick on that. And then we see the vestiges of it all over this planet. So I've never really looked into fossils. I've gone to all these numerous sites and continue to do so, and drill down into that. What we're looking at are the fingerprints of the dragon.
Yeah, so I'll just say on the dating, from a young Earth perspective, I put it at about 44 centuries ago, less than 5,000 years ago, when the catastrophe struck Mars and our moon. And in fact, I have evidence, and I present it in my solar apocalypse series, that the moon was habitable. It had a liquid water ocean and an atmosphere prior to Noah's flood, just thousands of years ago. And when it was struck, the entire surface of the moon was enveloped in fire. The atmosphere, less gravity on the moon, was mostly blown into space. There's an exosphere there today, but all that gray that we see on the surface of the moon is mostly ash. And in fact, the Apollo astronauts reported that when they got back into their space capsules, the landers and took off their helmets, it smelled musty like ash.
Wow.
Which was interesting. But I have evidence that suggests recent ongoing life on the moon, and I covered that in the series as well, where an atmosphere is not necessary. So a lot of really very shocking things, but I want to get into some images because I could literally talk for hours on this, and
let's
God,
pull
I
up.
wouldn't do that.
Pull up your first one, your first image.
All right. So are you seeing this on my screen?
Yes, we are.
This noticer? Okay. So one of the things that I do in the first volume of the Solar Apocalypse series is I address fossilization. Many people think that it's just bones, like what we see in most cases when we go into a museum on Earth today. A fossil is going to be bones. That's what they think. What most don't realize, however, is that there is such a thing as flash fossilization. And so this is a notosaur found on Earth. It's about 30 feet in length. It's one of the best flash fossilized fossils ever found on Earth. It was dug up in Canada a number of years ago. It took someone 7 years to chisel this out of stone. Yeah, and the point I want to make is, if all you could see was just the head of this notosaur sticking up out of the ground, LA, I'll just ask you, from, say, this angle right here where I'm circling the screen, would you realize that that was a great fossil, or would you think maybe it's just a rock?
Yeah, I would say that I'm looking at pareidolia. I'm saying I'm reading into what I'm looking at. So I would go with the latter for sure.
You think it's a rock, and yet it's one of the best fossils ever found on Earth. So with that intro, I will simply say, and I'll give some examples as we go, that many of the fossils that I have on Mars are superior to what you're looking at with this notosaur, and many of them are flash fossilized. Some of them are fully exposed on the surface. Some are just heads sticking through the surface, trying to take their final breath before they died and fossilized.
Real quick, when is this book being published? Because, again, I like you, brother, but you got a habit of talking about publishing something and it never happens, or it hasn't happened yet.
LA, you don't know this, but I'll have about 40 books out, 3 multi-volume series in about 3 years. So most of them worked on for more than 10 years each. So this is the Solar Apocalypse series right here. This that we're looking at, these are the volumes. They'll be reorganized a bit by the time it's published. So for example, on soft disclosures and secret space programs, I actually interviewed most of the prominent individuals who claim to have been to Mars and that kind of thing. And I recorded the interviews for 10 hours each in some cases. And there were only 2 people out of all those interviews who could actually tell me about things that I factually knew to be, for example, on Mars, that the public doesn't know about and that NASA has never talked about. And in some cases, these individuals were talking about those things before NASA actually went and photographed them. So just to say, I'm going to give some pretty compelling stuff in this to suggest that either some humans have already been to Mars, post flood, either after Noah's flood, or that there have been demons that were on Mars that are now on Earth that have been feeding information to some of these individuals. One of those 2 things.
I would go with the former. I think that we've already been there, and in their craft. That's conjecture, but I've heard that probably like you. I've heard that secondhand from other people that point to, this is what happened, and we were taken, and back and forth in a matter of hours. It's not like it's this 500-day journey. It's like hours, poof, and you're there, then you come back. So hidden history.
And next question, Tim. as far as these photos and pictures, is it not something? And again, yeah, but I want you to pull out some examples here real quick. But is that not something? Are you concerned if you put it out there, it'll just be deleted then off the public sites before?
Yes, I am. NASA doesn't know what it's already shared with the public, and in fact, there are millions of images that NASA has shared, large panoramas, and of those, many of them have lots of fossils that NASA has not caught or obscured, and some of them are really incredible. And me, I've just gone and found a bunch of needles in haystacks, basically.
All right, show us a few that you obviously believe are fossils. Some of them, I finished the last hour and a half of the video, Tim, and
oh, good.
they look like chimera-like creatures to me. You know, they could just be a rock, but go ahead and show us a few.
Yeah, maybe if they're carved intricately, you could call them rocks, but that doesn't work for no life on Mars, does it?
Well,
okay,
again,
so yeah. All right, so LA, this was photographed on Mars. Looks like petrified wood, but what you see here is actually lichens, lichen, which is complex biology.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. So this right here is proof of ongoing complex biology on Mars beyond just bacteria. Lichen is complex biology. The rover literally was driven right to this to photograph it by NASA. How could NASA not know? I mean, it's kind of obvious that they know and that they've been lying about it, right? So that right there is stunning for anybody who can see it and receive it and accept it. That is proof enough that there is ongoing life on Mars and that NASA has been lying to the public for decades. But this is nothing compared to what I have. So this is one that many people have seen. This is an iguana that was flash fossilized on the surface of Mars. NASA took a few photos of this. You ever seen this one, LA?
I know, I never have.
Yeah, this iguana made it totally to the surface of Mars before it died as the atmosphere was being thinned out. And Mars was still underwater. For flash fossilization like this to occur requires water, fairly warm water, not hot, but warm, and a lot of bacterial activity happening all at once, combined with certain chemicals in the water. And Mars has a higher concentration in its soil of those chemicals than Earth does. And so many of the fossils on Mars are like this. In most cases, you just see a head, but sometimes you get more than that. So this iguana has a couple of other little fossils stuck to its tail. But other than that, it's just like an iguana on Earth. NASA doesn't talk about that one publicly. And that one I didn't find. Others found that before me. But I find it to be highly compelling. All right. So this, you can see it's a beak with striations across the top and a wingtip right here and probably a claw right here. This is, I believe, a pterosaur just sticking out from the side of a hill, a dead pterosaur on Mars. The rover was not far from this, and this head is fairly large. I looked at this for quite a while, couldn't figure out what to make of it. And then I realized, because there are people who've testified of being on Mars and seeing pterosaurs and actually having to kill dive-bombing pterodactyls was their claim. But I have multiple photos of what appear to be fossils of pterosaur-like creatures. Yeah, and the better photo of this, and this is in a slideshow, but the better photo of this, you can actually see a row of teeth right here where I'm circling between the upper and lower beak.
And Tim,
okay.
I'm assuming you've done no type of image enhancement to this. This is just directly what you capture.
Yeah, there's no enhancement at all to this. It's just enlarged, zero enhancement. And that's the case with most of these photos. So here's one, zero enhancement. In LA, you might not recognize what you're seeing right here, but this is on Mars. This is a box in the background. It's rectangular. There's actually an X on the surface right here.
Can you enlarge that, Tim, for us? Or I'll just make...
Well, now I'm going to show you an enlargement of this right here in a moment, okay? But what I want you to see is all around this are heads sticking up through the surface. Here's one. Here's another one. Here's part of one. Here's part of one. Here's part of one. This creature is fully exposed on one side right here on Mars surface. Probably a fossil, but here's the same thing. I put a copyright across it. Sorry for that, till I share it publicly. But this was running the same image through HDR software to just, enlarge it and show the details of what's here. But this actually has an insectoid shoulder, which is what this is, a folded leg right here. Wings, it appears, that are folded right here. and then an amphibian mouth, almost a frog-like mouth, but it's striated. So, and Scott, I know you asked me to show my best photos. I'm saving that for the book. I'm not putting anything out that NASA could use to go and locate this in their images. I do have a sharper, better version of this. And you can see that the lips, it's so good, in fact, that you can see the lips are serrated like the edge of a serrated knife on this thing, and that it's eating something right here. You can actually see that in the better image. Nonetheless, this is enough structure to see you're looking at a creature, including a rectangular ear, an eye with an eyelid, a very intelligent looking forehead with almost a bony crown-like structure right here, and a nose, and then an amphibian-like mouth, a folded leg. So I consider that one to be quite stunning. These are moorheads, LA, on Mars, and again, not enhanced at all. In this case, this is exactly how NASA released it to the public, but NASA doesn't know they released this. And but I've got copyright text again running across this. Here's an enlargement of it. This thing has mandibles or something like that that are braided off its nose. This is an exposed head with a very ornate base. You see all these nodules here that are in a circular symmetry, radial symmetry. And then an ear, not rectangular, but this is the ear right here. Eyelid that's closed. And then looks like mandibles, but just the head sticking above the surface for this one. Another fossilized head, another fossilized head. Others around it, not so easy to recognize. This is a good recognizable one. This one, I don't know if you'll see it right away, but this is a dinosaur looking across a little valley, I guess, at another creature staring at it right here with a beak of some sort. Looks like it's got wings, almost like a bat standing on its feet right here. This is the unadjusted photo. This is as NASA released it right here. This right here I did as another HDR software thing to make it a little more visible in some cases, but it has red eyes exactly like you would see on some reptiles on Earth today, right here. This thing is a head sticking out from the side of this little outcropping, looking at this over here. Two other creatures on Mars' surface, no movement. So these could be flash fossilized fossils. In other words, they're not necessarily alive. And that's one thing that I didn't mention, LA. When we looked at that nodosaur, if you were to go to the museum and see that on Earth, it would have a greenish tinge, like a dark green. And that's because in many cases, flash fossilization, that chemical process happens so quickly that the color, the pigmentation of the creature's exterior is actually captured in the stone. It's preserved, in other words. So you can have a flash fossilized creature that, you know, once it's exposed, or if it's never buried, can look almost as if it's alive, depending on the level of decay. Here's another one. You can see the leg with a shadow right here beneath it, the back leg of an almost dog-sized creature with an odd head. Not a great photo, but I like it because it's got something popped up through the soil looking at it again, right here. And I'm going to skip a lot of these. This is one that I particularly like. Again, I ran it through HDR software. Whoops, let me go back. The reason I like this one is somebody in one of the SSPs told me about this and was talking about this to me. I recorded it in the interviews with him before he knew anything about me or that I had photos of it. So he described this in detail to me. He called it a dump truck or a truck-sized locust, basically, a hybrid that was carnivorous. And in the best photos of this, it's actually got a humanoid skull, LA, right here between its front legs, beneath its head. So it was described to me as having a mantid-like head, and you can see the head right here, being carnivorous and having 6 legs and being truck-sized, quite large, and very fast when it moved on Mars. This thing here is a fossil. It's not alive, but what you can see clearly in this one is the segments of the legs, 3 segmented legs on one side, and then part of the other front leg on the interior right here. And then what looks like a V-shaped structure for wings. I showed this to a fellow named William Ramoser. Have you ever heard of him, LA?
No.
He's a professor of entomology. He's written college textbooks on the topic. Professor Emeritus, taught entomology for about 40 years. He came out a few years ago and was claiming life on Mars, both insectoid and reptilian, with a series of photos that he presented to other entomologists at a conference. And they didn't take it seriously. And he showed photos that to him were very compelling, which to me would be hard, even to me, would be hard to recognize as what he was claiming. I shared this one with him, and he immediately recognized this as an arthropod on Mars, a large arthropod in life form. But his name is William Ramoser, and hopefully someday I'll be able to do something publicly with him. At any rate, this was described to me by somebody who claimed to have been on Mars without knowing that NASA had photographed it or that I had a photograph of it. And because he was able to describe this to me in detail and I knew that it actually existed, I took his claim of potentially being on Mars or having been exposed to something on Mars seriously. So I'm going to kind of skip over this, but there's a series of images I share in this presentation, and you'll find it in that 5-hour one that Scott mentioned on my YouTube channel, author Tim Cohen, where I demonstrate that there is something in the background here. This is a bunch of fossils. And by the way, LA, if you see this, I don't know if you can see it, there's a barbed tail off the end of this one right here. And let me see if I can quickly locate the better slides on that. I may have blown past it earlier. Just to show you that tail. Yeah. Okay. Well, this creature right here, and it's, I mean, I wouldn't think much of this just looking at this if it's all I saw in the image, right? But you can see it right here behind this. So this thing right here is behind this in this image. So I blew it up, and this is the head of the thing right here. Very poor image. But what's so intriguing about this is that NASA took a series of 5 images back to back. This is the same thing. This is the rock I was just showing you with the creature behind it. That creature was right here. You'll notice it's not present in this image at all. And if I go back one, again, it's not present. This is that rock again right here. But there are a series of images where it moves, that thing. So here's the creature right here that I showed you blown up a moment ago. I said the head was right here. This is the rock that it's behind. Here's another image. It's not there. You see that, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Well, NASA took 5 images, and that creature moved from here to here to here, and then not in the image at all, like this one right here, between those 5 images. So in other words, massive movements of whatever that thing was right here between those 5 stills, which suggests to me some possible ongoing life on Mars, at least when this was photographed. So here it is right here again, between these things, right? So here it's over here. Here, it's now over here. And you see the barbed tail I was telling you about? Almost like a devil's tail, like you'd see in a devil's costume, you know, here on Earth, sticking off this thing. Okay, so those are a few on Mars. I told you about Titans on Mars. This to me is the most shocking image probably of all of them that I have in terms of Titans. And the reason I say that is this is an orbital photograph. Does that look like dunes to you, LA?
Very interesting. Yeah,
The length of this is about 35 miles, the exposed portion, what you're looking at. The overall length of the thing, NASA took an infrared of it, which is this right here. So this is the exposed portion that you're seeing inside the red box, but it actually goes all the way on over to here, and there's a little bit back further behind here. The overall length I estimate to be about 70 miles roughly, something like that. But this exposed portion is about 35 miles. I think that this is the back of a reptile on Mars surface exposed through ice. That's what it looks like to me. I don't see how dunes could produce, how there could be any dunes with this larger to smaller pattern, you know, almost like chainmail, like you'd see on a reptile on Earth, you know, with scales.
Hey, Tim, real quick, pull that.
Yeah.
At least it was one of the. It looked like a Chimera monster out of the Comet picture. You did it later on in the presentation.
Yes, I'm going to show that in a moment. Right now, I'm just focused on Mars, so we'll wrap Mars up with this one. But anyway, so LA, the only thing I've shown to date are creature fossils and possibly living creatures, you know, on Mars surface in terms of just Mars. I've not shown any artificial structures. I've shown one artificial object, which is something that was described to me by one of these secret space program whistleblowers as a flash gun or a pulse pistol, but basically a microwave energy weapon that would at a distance of tens of feet to maybe 15 meters, pulverize, a creature, literally turn the thing to ash almost instantly, or burn it, depending on how thick its skin was. But it was a weapon that they supposedly carried on Mars that had a power pack that fitted the back of the, right behind the barrel, just above the stock, and it has a thick barrel with a lens-like structure on the end of it, but the size of a large pistol. Anyway, this fellow described it to me in 10 hours of interviews I did with him, and it turns out NASA photographed one laying on the surface of Mars. So that's the one artificial object that's technological that I've shown to date on Mars' surface. That's in one of the presentations on my YouTube channel, so people can go and actually see that photo. And I did an interview with this fellow. His name's William Whitecrow. He's deceased now, but I captured 10 hours of interviews with him and then a final half hour afterwards before he died. And in that half hour interview, I showed him things that he described to me as being on Mars that NASA had photographed without his knowledge. He didn't know about the photos, and captured his reactions to those things in that half hour interview, that final segment. That half hour interview is posted on my YouTube channel. People can go and watch it today. All right, so moving on. So that's
Ellie, do you have any questions with Tim real quick?
No, otherwise, too bad David Flynn wasn't alive today, because David believed, as I do, that there was this whole civilization on Mars, and this all happened at the same time of Noah's flood. This is, in my opinion, it could be. There's two ways to look at this. That this happened in advance of Noah's flood, and this is with the heavenly war between the dragon and his third of angels that rebelled with him, and the Most High God. And then there's, according to my, looking at the biblical narrative, this would be the recreation of the earth. So this could have happened millennia ago. This could have happened 100,000 years ago, what we're looking at on Mars. I don't know. I'm not there. And, I realize there's two different schools of thought, and we can go like this, and none of us are going to convince anybody. But in my opinion, I just think that what you're showing happened. This is the rebellion. This is the rebellion that we're looking at. Then there's the recreation, the dragon trap, which is what we are. We're the dragon trap. That's why think about this. Why would a loving Most High God, who knows the end before the beginning and the beginning before the end, why does he stick Adam and Eve in there, knowing exactly what's going to happen? The dragon's going to come and they're going to blow it. Why does he do that? Because at that point, he's able to usher in and speak Genesis 3:15, which spells the destruction of the dragon. It is, in fact, a dragon trap. It's deliberate.
Yeah. So I'll just say these things happened immediately before Noah's flood on Earth. And in fact, Mars was struck first, and Mars was the only one, a planetary body, one or more, that had existed and was densely populated. I'll just give this as a preamble to what I'm going to show next. There were several planetary bodies that were populated in our solar system, and they were seeded by the Nephilim. That's how they became populated, with unnatural creatures, some of which could reproduce. Maybe a lot of them could reproduce. And they became densely populated rapidly, like Earth became densely populated after the creation in Genesis. But anyway, I put these things as right before the flood on Earth, and that one or more planetary bodies were exploded by God himself.
Yeah, I agree.
Between Mars and Jupiter, and created the asteroids and pelted Mars, damaged Mars, struck our moon, badly damaged it, and then struck Earth. And Earth was partially shielded by the moon from some of the worst impacts.
Have you looked at David Flynn's work at all? Are you familiar with it?
I am familiar with it, yes. And in fact, I've looked at all of these things. So the models that you're proposing, what John Brandenburg proposed, everything that's been suggested out there, I address in my Solar Apocalypse series, and why I believe the biblical model is actually the correct one. And in terms of Genesis 3:15, LA, I have an entire volume, an entire book that I have written on that as part of my Coming Messiah History in the Tribulation Period series, and I call that volume Conflict of the Aeons, Understanding the Proto-Evangelium. Right. So all that relates to the Antichrist and Satan and a bunch of other stuff, not just what we're talking about. But
it's
I do address it.
War, which we find ourselves in.
Yeah, I do address it. So, at any rate, comets and asteroids, according to modern astrophysicists, old age people who are not biblical creationists, they claim that these are the building blocks of planetary bodies over billions of years, right?
Nonsense.
And solar systems and so forth. That's their claim. And that it began with gases. The gases would slowly coalesce over eons, many billions of years, and eventually form larger and larger bodies of matter, eventually getting into things the size of dirt balls, and then, small comets or asteroids, and just building up and building up and building up and building up till eventually you get, stars and planetary bodies and so forth. Well, if that were true, and I address this in detail in my series, if that were true, you would only find, the equivalent of rock, ice, mud, maybe some very primitive organic chemicals in comets and asteroids. Asteroids might have more metals, they would, but that's it. You'd find nothing else in them. Maybe a bacterium or two if you happen to be unrealistically lucky and land on a spot on one of these comets or asteroids where some bacterium that floated off Earth from Noah's flood or whenever, floated through space, landed on one of these bodies. We sample it and we find, oh, bacteria. Okay. Highly unlikely. I mean, I would call that basically impossible, but you wouldn't ever find more than that. What I am showing in this series is that we've now, not just NASA, but NASA, the European Space Agency, and JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency, have visited and photographed up close multiple comets and asteroids, primarily comets. And in all cases, they are actually filled with complex biology exposed on their surfaces, in most cases heads, in a few cases fully exposed corpses lying on the surface dead. And this one is one of my favorite photos right here. This was photographed by the European Space Agency. What you're looking at, LA, is the head of a reptile that's about 30 feet in diameter. This head is right here, sticking out of the surface of a comet. And let me see if I can enlarge this just a bit. So this is the eye, the nose, the mouth with an evident jaw area, part of a neck. The ear is either here or right here. I tend to think it's probably back here. But in any case, it's completely different in color from its surroundings, right? This photo is unedited. It's exactly the way that they photographed it. It's not sharpened, it's not edited, nothing's been done to it at all. So this is a Titan that was blasted into space off of a populated body, within debris that became a comet. And so what I'm proposing is that, in conjunction with the damage to the planetary bodies in our solar system, which were densely populated, including the ones that exploded, that there was a lot of surface life that got blown into space, with the debris that became the comets and asteroids. And in many cases, this life was alive when it was blown into space. It was buried, in the debris, and tried to make its way to the surface, whatever it was, right? To breathe, to survive. And something like this reached the surface and instantly froze in place. So this is not flash fossilized. I believe this one's actually just frozen, as if it had been exposed to liquid nitrogen, frozen almost immediately. So that's proof of a Titan, but it's a small one compared to the, tens of miles long one on Mars, if that's what the one on Mars is, right? And you've got people who look at that face at Cydonia on Mars, including John Brandenburg and others. That thing is about 1 mile to 1.25 miles in diameter, and it's highly decayed. And people have argued it's either a structure that's decayed or it's a phase, thinking it's artificial, or it's just a decayed mountain, according to NASA and the better photos. I have multiple photos of skulls that are in far better shape than that on Mars' surface that are orbital photos, anywhere from 1.5 miles to almost 4 miles in size. In other words, that face at Cydonia is nothing compared to some of the other stuff that's been photographed on Mars from orbit. And I am showing examples of that in the volume on Mars.
Hey,
in other words, yeah.
I was going to say I'd like y'all, both of y'all, to sort of address this. In other words, Daniel's a Facebook friend of mine. You can't tell by his. He is a big skeptic that we've ever been to the moon. That, you know, and to be honest, I know Daniel. We tease back and forth. He would be what people would call flat Earth or biblical cosmology. You know, and I know. To the skeptics that believe we live in this enclosed dome, what would be your rebuttal first, LA, to that, as opposed, you know, just a brief little as to the evidence you've looked at and others that have researched this issue, and then I'd ask Tim the same question.
I've flown over the North Pole when I came back from Israel. You can see the curvature of the Earth from an airplane at 39,000 feet. I mean, I flew over the North Pole. So that's what you do when you fly back from Israel. And it's a globe. Here's the bottom line, with all due respect. You get all the flat earthers together and you create a fund. And I've said this challenge 5 years ago. You create a fund, you get a private jet, you hire a flat earth pilot, all right? And you go to the edge and you bring back just one photo. That's all we need, just one photo. Just bring back one photo of the edge. We don't need 50,000. We just need one photo showing us the ring, you know, and the
ice wall.
Just show us one. And if you can't do that, then just shut up, because, you know, we've got. I mean, I've talked to computer guys who sat there at the moon landing. All right, when the stuff's coming off, the stuff's coming in the feed. Nobody's doing squat, and they're pointing back at the Earth, and there it is, and no one's doctoring anything. This guy's a born-again, spirit-filled Christian. He's not lying to me. He sat there just blown away at the pictures from Mars. So the L.A. Marzulli Challenge, which was issued 5 or 6 years ago, you pull your money together. You guys there are people out there who are flat earthers that have millions of dollars. You charter a jet. You can do this. And if you can't do it, then just shut up, because we've got photographs that completely refute the flat Earth. And they're not doctored. They're not doctored. You know, they're just not. Just show us one photograph. Just fly that jet and, you know, show us the ring of mountains with the ice thing and the canopy. Just show us that. And if you can't do it, then you got to rethink your theology. And the problem with this, and I'll end with this, is you're taking allegory out of context. When the Bible says the four corners of the earth, you take that literally. And it's metaphor. It's just metaphor. I mean, you know, it's like I will, you know, those who follow the Lord will renew their strength like an eagle. Well, I'm not going to become an eagle. Okay? And that's what we're looking at. And
Yeshua's the door, and he is the door, but he's not a literal piece of wood with a handle on it that you open with hinges. Exactly. You know?
It's the same.
He's a shepherd, and we're the sheep. But last time I checked, I don't look like my goats. You know, I don't resemble them at all. So there are metaphors. But Tim, what would be your response to that as well? I'm assuming it might be just as strong. By the way, guys, I am firmly pretzel. I don't even. I refuse to engage in this topic. But the reason I brought it up, Daniel brought it up. I know people that will watch this. I do have friends who are flat earthers. We just agree not to talk about it. But Tim, what would be your response as far as the not only I guess the evidence from these photos, because Daniel's saying that these are all photos taken on some island in British Columbia.
Yeah, that's nonsense. At any rate, I'll say three things. The first is that NASA did, in fact, fake the moon landings. They produced the footage. They faked it. The second, well, that's not the second thing. Part two of the first thing. NASA did, in fact, land on the moon. Apollo astronauts did, in fact, walk on the moon. In other words, NASA and the CIA and others that were involved, prepared to put out fake footage to try to, you know, hoax our going to the moon in case the mission failed. It was part of the competition with the Soviet Union at the time. They were prepared to lie to the world about it. And unfortunately, what happened later, you know, after we actually did succeed in going to the moon and putting astronauts there and taking a ton of great photos, what happened is, with those photos being released to the public, some of the fake stuff was simultaneously released. Don't know how that happened, but it did. And so people look at some of the photos and they say, oh, shadows multiple directions, all kinds of things, even some film footage that's obviously fake. And so to give people their due, yes, NASA faked it. But also NASA actually went to the moon. Second point is I'm familiar with the arguments of flat earthers, including their scientific arguments. They don't hold up, past a point. I also factually know that the Earth is a sphere. I have a military background. I factually know Earth is a sphere. I factually know that other planetary bodies in our solar system are spheres. There's a ton of evidence for planetary bodies beyond our solar system that are credible. Setting aside the billions of years claims of macroevolutionary cosmogonists, astrophysicists, setting that aside, there's credible scientific evidence for planetary bodies going around stars, beyond our own solar system. So can I say that Earth is sitting in the end of an arm of a spiral galaxy called the Milky Way, and that we can know that? No, I can't say that. I'm not going to say that the science is sound enough to make that claim, like NASA is claiming. And certainly we don't have the ability to photograph that at this stage in humanity's existence. But our solar system is, as scripture describes, and Earth is in fact a sphere. And when Isaiah talks about the circle of the earth, he's talking about a sphere, in fact, per the Hebrew text. So, yeah, to my flat earth brethren, you've been suckered, and it's designed to make you look like fools to the rest of the world, including the scientific community.
That's what it's designed to do, is to make people look foolish. Hey, guys, I got to get going here. I'm down to the 8-minute mark. So if we can wrap it up, that would be great.
Hey, Ellie, do you got any closing, any questions of Tim or comments or from your research regarding prior life on Mars, this catastrophe?
Well, I agree with his research. I think the pictures are absolutely compelling. And the question is, will we get there before the Lord's return? It would be amazing if we got there before the Lord's return. And we've already talked about the secret space force that's already been there. I get that. And they're starting to roll this stuff out. But in my opinion, what we're looking at is disclosure at some point.
Do you think they're doing this like a drip, sort of like with the aliens and the UFOs and some of your research? Do you think they've turned the faucet up from a drip to, well, now we're at a trickle?
It's interesting because when Grush came up, and this is a congressional hearing, he takes an oath, and if he's lying, he's in jail. He's in the Huskow for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, whatever. So, he's got to be very careful what he says. This congressional hearing, he's not going to get up there and just blab his mouth and say something. That's why you can see especially with Macy, when he's very guarded in what he says. But there's a couple of things. All the people who come to the front, Nick Pope, Luis Elizondo, Christopher Mellon, Grush, they're all military. They're all either military, ex-military. They're all part of the military-industrial complex. So this is a managed agenda. They're rolling it out. When Grush said that we have biologics, of course they have biologics. We've known about this for 30 years. Those of us in ufology have known about this for 30 years, longer. It's like a yawn. What bothers me is a complete ambivalence from the church at large. They're not interested in looking at it. And what they don't get, what most people don't understand is, and I'm still kind of like, with this. There's a saying I coined a couple of years ago: we go up, they come down. We go up, they show up. I hope that's what happens. But what if I'm wrong? And that's why the, plan B. So if they show up and we're still here, everything changes. The planet changes.
Let me tell you what is going to happen and what this is actually about, because I know. So, I'm sure you've heard a lot of this, LA, this notion that our government and other governments around the world, some of them, have been working behind the scenes with these humanoids to advance our technological capabilities and clandestinely.
Yeah, that's all good, sure.
Right. And that military industrial type folks have also been doing so secretly, not necessarily just governments. So there are multiple agendas at play. One is to supplant humanity if they can produce humanoids that can reproduce on their own. But meanwhile, these so-called aliens, these humanoids, are telling governments behind the scenes, we've modified ourselves genetically over time to such a degree we're no longer able to reproduce successfully on our own. We want to abduct and use human beings and other life on Earth to make a new version of ourselves. And if you'll allow us to do that, and of course the government has said do it without killing people, right, as much as possible. If you'll allow us to do that, we'll advance you technologically in case the bad humanoids show up, and we'll work alongside you and we'll fight with you if necessary to make war against them in the future. So in other words, our governments are looking at this and saying, well, we don't know if they're lying to us or not. But yeah, we'll take the technology because if they are lying to us, it might help us in the end. And it's all a setup so that when Yeshua returns with his angels from heaven, they look like the bad alien invasion. And mankind at that point, having experienced disclosure, to some degree beyond where we're at now, will turn its weapons of war against Christ and his angels at his return as if that were an alien invasion.
Exactly. No, we're kind of on the same page. I mean, there might be little nuances here, but we're basically, I call it the coming great deception, because this is going to change everything. Anyway, I got to go, guys. Nice to meet you.
Thanks,
All right, man.
Nice
well,
meeting you.
Thank you for joining. I'll hang out with Tim for a few minutes longer. If I don't watch it, I'll be here for the next 4 hours. But I appreciate you, and I know that for a fact. But
LA, I hope we can talk more further in the future.
Sure.
Talk further.
Absolutely.
And
I look forward
if
to
you
it.
can intro me to some of the people who I can share this with, that would be great too.
I will do my best. Nice to meet you. Thanks, Scott.
Very nice meeting you.
Thanks, LA. Appreciate it.
Yep. Bye-bye.
So Tim, so you believe this the sort of like a cataclysm that not only destroyed all life on Earth, other than just the 8 in the ark and the animals, but this was also a other planets where the Nephilim had been seeded were also part of this judgment, not just Earth. Is that a good summary?
Yeah, so all life on Earth except what was in the oceans that God originally created, right? So the equivalents of dinosaurs, the sea-based creatures, those died in the flood because there were chemical changes in the water in connection with Noah's flood that they could not survive. And then, of course, just what was aboard Noah's Ark survived. So in essence, God wiped out everything that he didn't originally create here on Earth in a brilliant and very sublime and to us would seem simplistic way. With Noah's flood. But prior to the flood occurring here, we had a habitable solar system. So people look at Venus today and they say, gosh, it's about the size of Earth. Where it's located around the sun, it could have been Earth-like in the past, but today the atmosphere is, super hot and couldn't sustain life as we know it. So we don't know what happened to Venus because we have a hard time even getting probes to the surface of Venus before they would just, melt and break apart within minutes, before they just completely fail. So there's some reason to think there might be some organics on Venus, maybe some past life, we're not sure. Mars, on the other hand, very Earth-like planet, but less gravity, smaller than Earth, smaller than Venus, and had tons of evidence for liquid water, ocean, or oceans on Mars in the past, for a warmer atmosphere. Even today, at like the equatorial areas on Mars, at the hottest part of the day, you're getting into the 60s, low 70s degrees Fahrenheit, like you'd have on Earth. In other words, if Mars had an oxygenated atmosphere like we have now, just with its current temperatures, you could walk in street clothes on Mars at the hottest part of the day and survive right now. But Mars had a liquid water ocean, a thicker atmosphere, lots of reasons to think Mars had plenty of oxygen in its atmosphere previously. And there's a ton of microbial activity and lichen and fungus, living on Mars today. That I have proof of that I share in the Solar Apocalypse series, and these photos that suggest more complex life creatures, potentially some having survived on Mars' surface to this point. Our moon, so Mars was struck, very badly damaged just about everything, they're wiped out in terms of life. What's left is mostly primitive, if not entirely so. Simple, in other words, up to the point of
and by
liking.
struck, do you believe there used to be an additional body, planet, whatever we want to call it, within the system, and that Yah, essentially God, exploded, and that's part of how he used that to wipe out Mars. And what we're seeing in this asteroid belt and in these comets and everything would be the remnants of this planet that 4,400 years ago, at the time of the flood, give or take a few years.
Yeah, God strategically blew up one of the bodies that had been seeded by the Nephilim, and because of where it was located and the force of that explosion, it pelted Mars, then it pelted our moon, leaving Mars and the moon as we see them today no longer habitable, basically, not the moon the way that it was, and Mars barely so. Although there are people in the SSPs who claim that Mars has a breathable atmosphere, and NASA's not telling the truth about that. So I cover that in my Solar Apocalypse series. In other words, they claim that Mars' atmosphere is much denser, and at the densest area is actually Earth-like today. That's their claim. The fact that the Mars, it looks like a little helicopter, basically, that NASA sent with a Perseverance rover that's been able to fly in Mars' supposedly thinner atmosphere, far exceeding its lifespan, its projected lifespan, and flying at altitudes NASA didn't think would happen, for extended periods. So it's highly unusual, and I asked NASA for the actual RPM data for that device, and they have not provided the raw data that I requested. I'm going to continue pushing for that, but the raw data could perhaps expose that Mars' atmosphere is actually denser than NASA's admitting, or maybe it's just as NASA is admitting. We're not sure on that yet. And but anyway, so Earth was then struck, and in Genesis it tells us the windows of heaven were opened in connection with the flood, right, Scott? And it tells us that the pillars, the foundations of the earth, were broken, fractured or crushed, broken. So if you have a window to heaven, right, or a window of heaven on the earth, what you're actually talking about is a place where the atmosphere is split and you can look directly into the blackness of space from the surface of the planet. When Earth is struck by a sufficiently large comet or asteroid, as a meteor, a big enough meteor, that's exactly what would happen. It would rip the atmosphere. If it's coming in at the proper angle, it would just rip the atmosphere apart, split it at that point, proceed to the surface and create a massive explosion that would split the atmosphere even more. And if you could look at that moment from the surface, without dying, straight up, what you would see is a window into space, literally. And the impacts that occurred on Earth, and we've got tons of evidence in terms of craters and so forth on Earth. They're really undeniable for those who are scientifically honest. We know that Earth was bombarded scientifically. What I'm proposing is that happened in conjunction with Noah's flood, and that it is that bombardment that A, opened the windows to heaven, and B, fractured the surface of that supercontinent or supercontinental shell, whichever it was that Earth had prior to the flood, and crushed the pillars that were supporting it, above a liquid water ocean that was under that shell or supercontinent, that supershell or supercontinent, so that the crust of the Earth, now fractured and the supports broken under it, would then, being denser than water, be sinking down now toward the core of the Earth, and the water under it coming up over it. So in other words, the surface of the Earth flooded from beneath, not just from above.
It says the fountains of the deep were
right. Yeah, so Earth flooded from below and from above, both. So God collapsed the water vapor canopy with that bombardment from space. And so I believe that Scripture is describing the same event that damaged Mars and the moon, but not speaking of what happened beyond Earth, in other words, in the solar system in Scripture.
Yeah, and that is, I mean, this is something, Tim, you've obviously studied a lot more since you've been writing your book for a while, but this is something I looked into probably 30 years ago when my faith got challenged out in Oregon by a lot of atheists, and started looking into some of this. You guys had a difference of opinion on the age of the universe, of creation. The only thing I'm really dogmatic on, I'm okay with your position. I'm okay with LA's position as far as in the beginning, Elohim, God created the heavens and the earth, and then there was day one. The only thing I get dogmatic on is I'm young Adam. In other words, less than 6,000 years ago, by golly, Adam and Eve. Adam was created, Eve was brought forth, or brought from Adam. So that's my kind of line in the sand. Definitely not any type of nonsensical theistic evolutionist or anything of that nature whatsoever. But yeah, on that I think Henry Morris, and back in the 60s, you probably read his book and about the water canopy. And we do know, just by looking at fossils of insects, we know that those insects could not even fly in our current atmosphere. We see insects on Earth that right now people would think are monsters, or they would think they're like chimera hybrids or something. Now, I don't know if that was just because that's the way Yah created them, and due to the atmospheric conditions. We do know men were bigger back then, like compared to us. We're devolving. So different topic, but I think what with the genetic pool being, mutations aren't helping us any. I mean, my wife's got genetic issues. People have genetic issues. We are devolving ever since Adam, and then I believe we've devolved ever since great times 500 Noah, however many generations that was. We've all got a little bit of Noah in us. But what would you say? Is there somewhere someone could go to, to actually look at these? That I guess we'll close up here in a little bit, but would they just go to the NASA website? Is this something that they've got like hundreds of thousands of photos, and other space agencies that have all these photos?
Yes.
And anybody can just go in there and to their heart's content just start clicking through them.
Yes. And in fact, if I had the time, Scott, to spend every minute of my life till I was 100 years old and died of old age, from the time I was old enough to get on a computer, let's say hypothetically, doing nothing but that, I would not get through all of the images already available from NASA, just NASA alone.
So it's,
and
so how many hours would you say you've put in kind of skimming or searching images and examining them and selecting out the best examples? How if you had to do time wise, thousands of hours, hundreds of hours,
thousands of hours.
And do you have anybody else?
And to the point where I just say, what, I have enough. I can tell you this, and I have fantastic things. These aren't my best. They're very good. Mm-hmm. I have some that are better, lots that are not as good. But I found enough to prove what I'm saying from start to finish. And I don't need to spend a lifetime doing it. But that being said, in the future, if people want to spend, lots of time, lots of people want to pour through these photos, I am sure they will find things as good as, if not better than what I have found if they look carefully.
Yeah. And again, too, this might even sound I know it'd sound crazy or cray, or maybe it's not sounding so crazy right now with the like I was mentioning with LA, with the drip now turning to a faucet turning. Could you see NASA coming out with some of their best photos that they might even not have published publicly, proving life as part of this great, what I believe is a great deception coming at the end of this age? And we both sort of align and agree that we're sort of in the final holding pattern before we start winding down the end of this age. Do you think that might be part of the alien disclosure, which we all, early on, me and LA all established that we believe these are the fallen sons of God, the watchers, the biblical account? But do you think that that's something NASA, the other governments might do to actually release these images?
To be perfectly honest, NASA lies. We know that.
Well, we know that.
Yeah, but I'm going to say beyond that, NASA's incompetent in many cases. They've got great engineers, without knowing about the anti-gravity stuff. They've got good engineers for the conventional stuff. But they don't have archaeologists. They don't have acceptable paleontologists. They don't, in my view, have acceptable biologists. Frankly, those people are idiots in many cases. And I hate to be so blunt, but they are. And you can either say they're really as dumb as they come across, in other words, idiots, like I'm saying, or they are lying to keep their jobs and their pay through their teeth constantly. It's one of those two things. There's no in between on it. And there have been some NASA people who are actually honest, who came out and told the truth, and NASA's done everything to suppress what they were saying. And I addressed those people as well in my Solar Apocalypse series. So in other words, I cover all the bases, everything. And so I don't think NASA is qualified, we'll say with double quotes around that, qualified to be part of the disclosure of anti-gravity craft and this kind of thing. I think it's more likely that will come out of left field, maybe from the military-industrial complex, perhaps our actual military, some more disclosure there. Perhaps the humanoids just deciding, okay, it's time to sucker mankind the rest of the way and landing on the White House lawn.
Well,
those are all possibilities.
And to that theory, I do believe that there will be a literal war in heaven, and Satan and the fallen angels will be cast down, no longer allowed to accuse the brothers in the heavens. The accuser is thrown down, and I think it gets supernatural biblical up in here, sort of a 3.5 year, 42-month, 1,260-day period in which it is literally like the days of Noah. So, yeah, man, I appreciate you joining me. I do. It's 9:42 here.
Thank you, Scott.
But we'll chat again soon, Tim, and pleasure speaking with you, brother. All right. So I'm gonna end the broadcast.
God bless.
We'll talk to everybody later. Bye-bye.
Oh, one thing. Tell them about Profias's site, please.
Oh, okay. You can tell them right now. It's you're still.
Yeah. At the very end here. Thank you. I tend to forget myself. So, for those who wish to know about my books that are out and the ones that are coming, just go to prophecyhouse.com, prophecyhouse.com. And then the YouTube channel, as Scott mentioned, where you can actually see more on this topic we were discussing tonight. And sorry, let me type it correctly here. Okay, so it's just youtube.com/author Tim Cohen, AUTHORTIMCOHEN, no spaces. And this right here that I'm circling is the 5-hour interview that you mentioned, Scott, that people can see. And going a little further over, this is the half-hour one I mentioned with William White Crow after 10 hours of interviews with him, where I showed that pulse pistol or flash gun, that artificial object on Mars.
All right. Well, thank you, brother. And anybody that's interested in it, check it out. And I'm going to prompt him to, maybe try to get this series out sooner rather than later, especially when I think we're on the timeline. So anyway, thanks for joining me, brother. Appreciate it.
Thank you. God bless.